this guy.
People ask a lot about the algorithms.
Yeah.
Someone made something creative, something beautiful, something interesting, and then you shared it with a friend. Follower count is super important because you're going to have a much better chance of reaching anybody who follows you than anybody who doesn't follow you.
Adam Mosseri, our best friend, is out in the public scene once again. He's hopping in the podcasting circuit, talking about the latest going on in the world of Instagram. And as we know, they like to keep things very confusing. And so that's why he's actually being more present on his own platform. And we all know they like to be incredibly confusing. So that's why he's been a lot more active this year on his own account and then also on interviews like this. So what we're going to do is break down the important parts that you would actually care about from the recent episode of the Colin and Samir Show featuring the head of Instagram, Mosseri. I went through and listened to the whole episode that was over an hour and a half to distill the points that you'd actually want to know and cut out all the stuff that you don't. So let's save you a bunch of hours. Let's demystify Instagram and let's help you achieve your goals far faster. Let's hear from Adam. So the first topic they talked about is our favorite thing when it comes to Instagram, and that is reach and getting more reach and how the algorithm actually works when it comes to pushing content to more people. The biggest takeaway from this whole portion is that Mosseri said that shares are the most important element for getting more reach. He said that numerous times throughout this section and throughout the whole episode.
People ask a lot about the algorithms.
Yeah.
Feel like it's a black box. Everyone's always feels like they deserve more reach than they get, and sometimes that's the case. But one of the most important things to look at if you're trying to evaluate how your videos or anything is doing on Instagram is definitely the sends. Sends, I would look at sends per reach. So of the people who saw it, how many of them sent it to a friend? Because that tends to be the content that does the best because it tends to drive the most value for the overall community.
So for you as a creator, you want to be thinking of what can I create that is highly shareable? Because if you do get a lot of shares, and especially if you get them early on after posting, that video is going to do very well. So think about the things that you've shared. Usually it's emotion building things. People should be saying OMG, WTF, high emotion things. If you create that into content, it's going to be shared.
Someone made something creative, something beautiful, something interesting, and then you shared it with a friend. You send it to a friend, you start a conversation, then that helps them discover more things themselves and they send it to someone else and that starts another conversation. And that's why short form video for us is so symbiotic with connecting people with their friends. Part of our reason to be, which is to connect people with friends.
Next, they talked about what else is important beyond shares that dictates how far a post goes.
I think another thing that's important to take a look at though is it isn't a direct engagement rate, is what percentage of your reach came from accounts that followed you versus what percentage of your reach came from accounts that don't follow you. We just showed your content to them, but it should be more stable than your unconnected reach. When it comes to unconnected reach, showing you something in Explore or in the Reels tab as you're going through content from accounts you do not follow, there's a lot of opportunity and there's a lot of responsibility. On the opportunity side, we should be able to help you discover things you didn't even know you loved. And so what I think with recommendations is that should help with niche interests and helping small creators grow, because it should help people discover accounts that normally wouldn't get discovered. There's way more unconnected content than there's connected content. Let's say there's 100 or 200 things you could see in a given day. There's hundreds of millions of pieces of content posted today that are from accounts you do not follow. A few of those might be really exciting for you.
Across Instagram, there's multiple different ways to consume content, and each of those little categories has their own algorithm, like stories, main feed, explore, etc. And Mosseri went into a bit of detail to explain the differences in each of these areas and how they're working to make the whole experience a lot more seamless, because right now it is kind of all over the place and a little bit scattered on Instagram because there's so many different varieties of content.
So in feed, we try to heavily preference content from accounts that you follow and accounts where you've got mutual follows. So if you and I follow each other, we're probably friends in real life. That content we will value more in a number of ways. One of those is like we just shift more of the weight in the value model towards things that friends would do with each other's content, like liking. Whereas that matters less in the context, or something like that might matter less or commenting, which would matter less in an unconnected content where if you're commenting on a public reel, it's just different. It's a different place. That probably matters less in unconnected surfaces like Explore or Reels. But in general, sends matters the most, I think, across the board. And we're trying to share as much as we can. Like for a while, they were very different systems. So maybe your Explore was all about men's fashion and your Reels tab was all about gardening, and that doesn't make any sense. So we're trying to make sure we consolidate the infrastructure. This is a bit more technical, so maybe less interesting. So the app behaves more like you would expect if you are really interested in something that you would see it in any recommendation surface.
I think it's technical, but as professional creators, it matters a lot to us.
Totally.
Right? Because the first thing we think about is how does our content surface in this environment? And then we will make adjustments accordingly, right?
Absolutely.
Next question was a big one, and it was, do followers matter on Instagram? This was his response.
Follower count's super important because you're going to have a much better chance of reaching anybody who follows you than anybody who doesn't follow you. So there's a really strong correlation between how many followers you have and how many people you reach. That said, they matter less today in a world where there is more time spent looking at recommendations than before than they mattered, 5 years ago. Now, you might say, stop leaning into recommendations, like just focus on followers, bring back old Instagram. The issue with that is that the pie is smaller. Recommendations are driving more overall engagement. Yes, that's good for us as a business. We're connecting consumers with more content they're interested in, so that's good for consumers. But there's more reach to go around, so it actually does lift average reach for all creators. But it does mean that your reach is more volatile because a larger percentage of your average reach will be through the recommendation system. And that's a sneaky thing that I think a lot of people don't realize is a lot of unconnected reach can come not in the surfaces we've talked about, like Explore or the Reels tab, but they can show up in stories. Or they can show up in DMs. If you share a reel into a story, or you share a reel as a DM and someone watches that, then you've got another impression on the play. And so sometimes it can come that way too.
And I did like the fact that he was honest about that. I think that it's very true that on Instagram, it matters the most out of any other platform. And that's why they need to focus on helping small creators get there, because that first initial push can be so difficult oftentimes. The conversation then went towards TikTok, and Messeri was asked how Reels are better than TikTok.
Obviously, TikTok has been leaning into photos and trying to get into other formats like stories, but they've had a lot less success there. I'm not speaking poorly of TikTok. They're a phenomenal competitor. They do a number of things really well, and there's a few things where I still feel like we're trying to catch up with them. But in general, I think our suite of tools, which, by the way, sometimes can be a little intimidating, or people get stressed by how many options there are, I do think gives creators more freedom to figure out how they want to realize their goals. And I think that's important. We're also a larger platform worldwide, and so that gives you more potential reach, particularly if your content isn't as globally applicable, which is hard in video. If your content requires deep understanding of what's being said, that's tough if someone doesn't speak the language. But I think TikTok's great. I think they do really great work, and they've inspired us to get a lot better at what we call exploration-based ranking, so doing better ranking for smaller creators and helping them have a chance of breaking out and just be really, really reliably entertaining.
And the other question around this I found really interesting was that TikTok is very well known for giving you a completely curated feed very quickly, even as your interests change. And Instagram tends to be a lot slower. So Colin Samir asked Messeri directly, how long does it take for the algorithm to adjust to your new interests and change the content that you're shown?
We're still behind them on speed there. You have to be careful though, because sometimes you can be the opposite problem. Like Explore is still a little tippy. It's like, hey, I watched one cooking video. It's like, ease up. Like, I don't need this to be all cooking all the time. That's not just about speed though, that's about intensity. So you might adapt quickly, but not go overboard in how much cooking in that example you use. They're very fast. They're very fast in two ways. One, understanding your interests more quickly and adapting. And two, getting content that is going to succeed really quickly. And that helps them be culturally relevant. We've been closing the gap pretty quickly on both of those fronts, but there's still room to improve on those areas for us.
The guys then asked Adam, how many people are watching Instagram content with no sound at all? And the numbers are pretty insane. So nearly 50% of content that's consumed on the platform is consumed without sound. And even I didn't have a true appreciation for how important that makes things on the screen in terms of captions, the visuals. Essentially, you want to deliver your message in a way that is still enjoyable or valuable without any sound at all, because half the people that come across it won't have their sound on, which is insane. And a massive golden nugget that came from this conversation.
I don't have a stat to share, but last I checked, it's not about people, it's about time. So like what percentage of video impressions have sound on or off? And I think it was roughly half. It was roughly half. I mean, give or take 10% plus or minus, but it was roughly half.
I think that's a really important thing for creators to think about.
Yeah, that's why captions are so important. That's why you got to make sure your captions are visible in the feed, not just in the full screen viewer. One of the classic mistakes is put your captions and you don't even see them until you expand the video. And then by then you probably have sound on anyway.
Instagram has been stating repeatedly that they're incredibly focused on creators, more so than say publishers. And Messeri explained the difference between the two and why they're so focused on creators.
One thing that is controversial is we focus on creators and we don't focus on publishers. We don't try to prevent publishers from using our platform, but we build features for creators. We don't build features for publishers. I don't have teams that goal on any production that includes publishers if I can avoid it. I have teams go on creator production.
Can you define the difference?
Yeah, so a creator is an individual that creates original content with some level of commercial intent. I don't mean necessarily making money. It could just be like part of what you do. You're trying to grow because you're trying to achieve something on the platform. Publishers are, brands, magazines, newspapers. It doesn't have to just be news. And there's amazing content from publishers on the platform, but they're not individuals. They are creating original content and they definitely have commercial intent. And we focus on creators because we believe power is going to continue to shift from institutions to individuals across industries. We've seen this in sports. We've seen this in news. We've seen this in music. We've seen this in every vertical. And we also see that in the data. Creators drive, on average, more engagement than a publisher does. People want to see the world through the eyes of another individual that they relate to or that they look up to, more than they want to consume content from a publisher that they feel is hyper-processed and produced and designed for them.
Next, they talked a bit about creator monetization, and I just wanted to make something very clear. I completely disagree with Messeri's opinion when it comes to small creators and monetizing their audience.
But actually to a very small subset of creators. The vast majority of creators are very small, and they're too small to monetize in a meaningful way. And so yes, they care about monetization, they want to hear about monetization, but it's actually not the thing that they can or should really focus on, because if you have 2,000 followers, it's not really going to be the thing that you should spend your time on is figuring out how to grow your following, not try to make money from 2,000 followers.
He dropped a specific number. I think it was if you only have 2,000 followers, you should worry about growing your audience and not monetizing. And I think that's just completely backwards. If you have a niche audience that you could serve, there are people building $1 million businesses with Instagram accounts that are 2,000 followers or less. So a lot of people limit themselves by only trying to focus on growth, and they miss out on a ton of financial opportunity. So don't love that he mentioned that. I wanted to make that very clear, but they do talk a lot about creator monetization, how Instagram approaches it, and how they plan to approach it moving forward.
I do totally understand the revenue matters a ton, particularly for large creators, and large creators are disproportionately important, right? Because they reach more people. On rev share, because I want to make sure I'm not skirting the question, it's something that we're working on. It's something that I think is just fundamentally more difficult with short form video, though I do think shorts is doing decently. But with long form video, everything is a bit more straightforward, particularly attribution. So if you watch a 20-minute video and you see 3 ads, what percentage do you want to share? And it's very clear who that share goes to. Whereas with short form video, if you watch 50 videos and you see 15 ads, who gets those dollars? So attribution is tricky in and of itself. But the bigger problem is that we haven't figured out a way to do it that isn't just burning cash. We are running tests for what we call bonuses, which are essentially performance-based incentives. So, we will pay you to create more content, and then people create more content. But then we measure, does that actually increase the revenue for the app? And so that we can actually have money to share back. We are finding that it is much easier to make those programs ROI positive for photos than for videos. And one of the reasons is photos are higher monetization efficiency because you get more ad impressions because you look at photos for less time. But another is that per dollar, when you pay a creator to create something new, they will create more incremental photos and incremental videos because videos are harder to make. And really interesting, the incremental content they make is lower quality than the average quality, but that drop is much lower for photos than for reels. So they'll make another reel, but they will only make one, and it's way worse than the reel that they would have created otherwise, or the first reel that they would have created either way. We are trying to figure out, okay, well, what can we do about that? How can we get this working? Because to me, I need to make enough money so that we can pay creators and have those checks be credible. If I send you guys a $12 check, it's probably going to make you think worse of us than if we just didn't have a program. And so we're iterating in Japan and in Korea and the US to try to get these programs on the video side working so that we can then scale them up. But for us to do that, it's going to need to not burn money. It's going to need to get to a place where the eligibility can be, I hope, ideally public, so you know why you're allowed to be in the program in the first place, and the checks need to be credible.
Could you explain partner ads?
Yeah. So basically, the way a partner ad works is you do what you would normally do. So you would do, who's one of your? We talked about Canon before. So let's say Canon was like, we want you to make some content. We want to do some ads for you for our cameras. You would make the creative. And then you would make it so that they could use your creative as an ad to people who don't even follow you. And it just basically allows you to own the creative. The content is attributed to your account, but it can get distributed through our ad system. And so it gets all of the measurement of our ad system and all that infrastructure, which helps advertisers understand demand, understand demographics, understand conversions. Because the bread and butter of our advertising business is not brand advertising, though that's a good amount of money. It's direct response advertising, where measurement is everything. And then Canon will know, all right, I wrote these guys a check. Like, what did I get for it? And that could be scary.
Yeah.
Or that could be amazing.
Yeah.
Because if they realize that they paid you, I'm making up random numbers now, $10,000, but they made 35, then you're worth more than you're getting paid.
Got to increase our rate.
Yeah. But you would never know unless we do this. I think it's probably about being more clear about who your audience is and why that audience is disproportionately valuable to that advertiser. Like if you only have a few thousand followers, but they're really passionate and they're all about like biohacking and health stuff, then like they are way more valuable to a thorn supplement advertiser than the average person. And so you shouldn't just care as the advertiser about the number. You should care about how likely, in this case, in this hypothetical example, those followers are to want to buy your product. So it's about understanding your niche and why that niche is disproportionately valuable to that advertiser is probably the most straightforward way.
As teased earlier, Instagram is focusing a lot on small creators this year because it is so hard to get off the ground for small creators. And if you don't have an influx of talent coming to the platform, it becomes really difficult to keep people consuming long term. So Maseri gave some details as to why they struggle and how they're planning on changing that to make it easier for small creators to get going.
So more small creators will find some success on TikTok than any other platform. But often it's like a flash in the pan and then it goes away. And that's not really helpful because you haven't built anything sustainable. Whereas on Instagram and on YouTube, it's harder to break in. I think we aren't as good at valuing smaller creators. It's harder from a technical reason. You've got less data. But so it's a little bit harder to break in. So we're trying to find the right balance. Make it possible for new talent to break out and grow while not having a reach become so volatile that your follower count doesn't matter. And people say it doesn't matter on Instagram, but it really matters in a way that it doesn't matter nearly as much on some of the other apps.
Long form versus short form content is a heated debate in the creator economy, and that was the next topic that they discussed. There's pros and cons to both. Really, I think it makes sense to do both and double down wherever you have a unique advantage. I see it as apples and oranges. They bring different things to the table. Both have different strengths and weaknesses, and it's up to you to decide how to best use them for what you're trying to achieve. That's what it all comes down to. There is no one size fits all when it comes to a social media strategy. Start from what you're optimizing towards. If it's money, then work backwards from the content that drives the most sales and helps you sustain a long-term business. If it's building an audience, focus on that. Figure out what your goals are, and I mean your goals, not what other people tell you your goals should be, and work backwards from that to build a strategy that helps you get there.
So yes, if you were going to compare someone who watched one 15-second video end-to-end and one 15-minute video end-to-end, so clearly you're going to have more memory, more affiliation with the 15-minute video. I don't know that means that on average, the average short-term creator has a harder time building a brand because the average short-form video creator can make many more videos in the same amount of time for the same amount of money.
Instagram recently made a bunch of changes in terms of how they deal with aggregators on the platform. So an aggregator is basically, think of a theme page where they take somebody else's content, they take a bunch of people's content around a specific topic, and they share it as their own on their page. This is how a lot of people got started in Instagram. I started a whole business around this very concept like 7 or 8 years ago, but massive changes are coming to the platform that make it a lot better for creators and not so great for aggregators.
So the idea behind Originality is that we should make sure that more value, if we can, flows to the original creators that make something than those who find that content and then repackage it and aggregate it from other original content creators. And that if we don't do that, we will just erode more and more trust with the original content creator community, which will be bad for us over the long run. Even though it might actually not be beneficial, it might be beneficial, but it might not, probably won't be beneficial to the business in the short run. So what we work on is defining originality, and there's different buckets. There's original, there's mixed original. So if I take your video and then I do a green screen on top and I talk about it, that's mixed original. And then there's unoriginal and mixed unoriginal. So I just take someone else's and I post it. So what we're trying to do is, in some sense riskier, is not recommend content from aggregators. So if you follow an aggregator because you love them, and there are a lot of amazing aggregators out there, great. You'll see their content in your feed. If we think you're interested in it, we're not going to do anything to get between you and that content. If you're not seeing it, it's because we could be wrong, but we think something else is more interesting to you that you follow. But if we show you content from an aggregator, from an account you don't follow, then that's much more on us. And so I actually said this before, there's more opportunity and there's more responsibility. That is one thing we do. We call that direct replace.
Okay.
So if we can find the original, then we just swap it out, which is pretty nuts.
So it's almost as like a reshare? Like, would it still look like it's from the aggregator? But
No.
No. He's just saying
it's
it would be the original video in your feed.
Again, this is in a recommendation. It would be weird if it was just in the connected context.
Right.
Okay.
But you're just looking at stuff that you think are going to be interesting in the Reels tab. This aggregator found this amazing dunk. If we can find the original post of that dunk, we're just going to swap it out and show you the original because
in the feed.
yeah.
Since there are so many AI tools out there, Instagram's response to that is by adding the made with AI tag to content that their algorithms flag as having used AI tools. So he explains briefly how that works and why they implemented it in the first place.
So there's going to be more and more content that is generated with AI over time, and it's going to be more and more difficult to identify it. There is no way we're going to be able to programmatically identify everything that is posted on Instagram that did use AI as having used AI long term. So I want to be clear, like the goal here is when we know for us to be transparent so that people can make educated decisions about what to believe and not. By the way, it might have no relevance because if it's just a funny video or a funny picture, it doesn't really matter if it's made with AI or not necessarily. So we're trying to lean on industry standards here. And so Adobe has, I forget what the name of the metadata property or attribute is, but they mark files that used AI in Photoshop as having used AI, and then we pick that up and we mark it. And some of the other apps are doing the same thing. What's happening is people are doing benign things in Photoshop that are technically using AI. It might not even be generative fill. It might be like, I don't know, maybe their stamp tool uses AI. Because AI is just a core technology.
yeah.
Doesn't mean totally fabricated image. And so it's getting marked because they're being conservative in what they're marking in the file. And then we're just respecting the file's mark, saying, hey, AI was used to make this. And then it's possible that the creator doesn't even know that it was AI in the tool that they used. So we have to figure this out because clearly this is frustrating and not the ideal experience. And I'm not sure where we're going to land because this isn't just an Instagram or a Meta issue. It's an industry issue. And I think if we do our own thing and everyone does their own thing, then and you don't have an industry standard, I think the whole internet is less well off.
This next bit we're going to talk about wasn't actually from this interview, but it was from a recent interview with MKBHD, but I wanted to include it in here. Vasari talked about the topic of hashtags and basically said they don't bring you more reach. I think it's important to clarify what he means here, because in the post where he talks about this and he shares that clip, he says that hashtags can help people that are interested in that content find it, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to help it go viral. But I think that's kind of an oxymoron, because if more of the people that are highly likely to enjoy that content are able to find it easier, then that's going to bring you more positive engagement that then will eventually push it farther. So I definitely don't think you should obsess over hashtags, but using relevant tags to help Instagram sort your content and make it easier to find for people that actively want it is a no-brainer. So what I would take from that is use hashtags, but don't obsess over them. They're meant to help you categorize content, not necessarily go viral. So a tool, but not something you should obsess over.
I have a screenshot of one of your stories where someone asked you, do hashtags improve visibility? And you said no.
Not really.
I just like screenshotted that. So anytime a brand's like, can we do the hashtag? I'd be like, here's the man telling you. No need.
We should get a domain that's like dohashtagshelpreach.com and then we can just put the canonical. No, just big.
Just a no, that's it.
Big no.
With TikTok potentially being banned, the guys tried to ask what it would look like for Instagram specifically if TikTok were to get banned. Unfortunately, Adam didn't take the bait too hard, but here's what he had to say on that subject.
I can't talk too much about this one. In general, I worry about a world where more and more platforms are banned in more and more countries, and governments use that stick as a way to push their own agendas. The vast majority of our business is outside of the US. It would, I think, drive more attention, not only to Instagram, but to YouTube and to other platforms. But it is a step in a more and more fragmented internet, which I think is probably bad overall. Now, to be clear, it could maybe get sold and, there's other paths here. I don't want to guess about what's going to happen. And so without speaking to the specific ban and TikTok here in the US, I do worry about a more and more fragmented internet.
The next bit I found incredibly interesting. They positioned the hypothetical scenario where if Instagram were to fail 5 or 10 years down the line, what would be the reason for their failure. And I believe that whole idea of staying relevant is why they and I believe that whole focus on staying relevant is why they try out so many different features. They throw things against the wall just to see what sticks because they do want to stay relevant. And so with that, they're obviously going to piss some people off. I know they've probably pissed you off. I know they've pissed me off in the past, but that's their thesis, to stay around and stay relevant. And it's worked to this point.
When people ask me what my biggest concerns are, they almost always ladder up to this idea of the world evolving faster than we can keep up. So it's almost always the reason why I'm worried about the thing is I think the world is going to change faster. We've seen that for all of human history, particularly in technology. The rate of innovation has just been increasing. And I think the most likely thing for any platform of ours is that eventually we will just move slower than the world, and the world will move away and we'll be left in the dust. And so what that looks like is harder to predict, but I think if it happens, I put a lot of money on that's why it happens.
If you are new to Instagram and you're looking to grow on the platform, I recently dropped a video with a step-by-step formula for helping brand new accounts grow on Instagram. So if that's your goal, this video right here is for you. It'll provide you a ton of value in a short form factor and help you grow far faster. So go ahead and click this now. I will see you over there and we'll get you growing on Instagram.